Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Go ahead and grab a Bible and let's go back to the 89th Psalm. We're picking up there in the 38th verse. In the 38th verse. And again, this psalm is probably written by Daniel during the time of the Babylonian captivity when he's he's struggling with the fact that God had promised, made a covenant with David that a descendant of David would always be on the throne of Israel. But here they find themselves in captivity, and but believing that that God would honor that covenant, and so he's kind of between a rock and a hard place. And I think it's a kind of a good lesson for us that many times I think we find ourselves in circumstances where on the one hand we don't we believe that God is a good God and a loving God and a merciful God and a just God, and that He walks with us through the valley of the shadow of death, and we believe all those promises, that He gives us the spirit of peace, that He'll never leave us nor forsake us, all those things. We believe those, the life abundant. We believe all those promises, but sometimes the circumstances we find ourselves in leave us scratching our head a little bit as to how to reconcile those two realities. I believe the promises of God. He says He'll never leave me nor forsake me, yet I feel alone. He promises me peace that passes all understanding, yet I am a nervous wreck. And so we find ourselves in like the psalmist, I think here, who was trying to reconcile everything that he saw with everything he believed. And so as we pick up today, in verse 38, he's going to write and talk about a situation, or continue to talk about this situation, and he is mindful and reminding those who would hear this psalm that if they can't reject their side of the contract, and so he again he's looking at the situation. Jerusalem has been destroyed. The king has been overthrown, and people carried away into captivity, and everything he sees says that God has broken His covenant. Because that's just what he sees. But he, again, is wrestling with his belief, as he's talked about in the previous verses, in God's faithfulness and God's covenant. And so he's going to go directly to God, and he is going to speak directly to God about this issue. He's confused and he needs answers. And so he says, but thou hast cast off and abhorred, thou hast been wroth with thine anointed, thou hast made void the covenant of thy servant, thou hast profaned his crown by casting it to the ground, thou hast broken down all his hedges, thou hast brought his strongholds to a ruin, all that pass by the way spoil him. He is a reproach to his neighbors. And so, again, from his vantage point, it appears that God has violated the covenant that he made with David, that he has rejected the king of Israel, that he is angry with the people of Israel. He is angry with the descendants of David. The servant, the king, who he had made a covenant and said they would continue to be there, continue to reign. Again, to the psalmist, from and again, you can. It's easy to understand how he felt that way. That from the human viewpoint, it appears that God has broken his covenant. I mean, he goes so far as basically to say, you have profaned the crown. You have taken the crown off the king and you have thrown it on the ground. And again, so he is, he's very open in talking to God about what he sees taking place. And again, I go back to a lesson I've brought up numerous times as we've come through the Psalms. Again, you see that he's talking to God. He's sharing his heart with God, and telling him what he sees, and how he feels. Again, I think reverently, he's not, just blasting God, but he's just stating, this is what I see. This is how I feel. You broke down the hedge, and all that passed by the way spoil him. What he's saying is, Jerusalem has lost her defenses, her walls, and now everybody, anybody that comes by just goes in and picks up whatever they want, takes whatever they want. The enemies are, again, verse 41, he's a reproach. Everybody's laughing at Jerusalem. Not only that, but in his viewpoint, if you go on, he says, thou hast set up the right hand of his adversaries. Thou hast made all his enemies to rejoice. Thou hast also turned the edge of his sword and hast not made him to stand in the battle. Thou hast made his glory to cease, cast his throne down to the ground. The days of his youth hast thou shortened. Thou hast covered him with shame. Selah. And he says, so it's just, not only have you torn down Jerusalem, but again, from where I'm sitting, is what the psalmist is writing about. He says, from what I see, is that not only have you torn down Jerusalem, but you have built up, you have lifted up the evil, the wicked nations, the enemies, as he calls them in verse 4. Adversaries is the word that he uses in verse 42. He says, you've lifted them up. He says, you've torn us down, and you have lifted them up. You didn't. Again, he brings up this charge in verse 43. You have turned the edge of the sword and has not made him to stand in battle. He says, you have come, instead of keeping a descendant of David on the throne, you've come against our king and taken him off of the throne. You have again taken the king, our king, off the throne. You have defeated him. You have taken him. Verse 45. You have shortened his reign, and so we're at a very transitional point in this psalm. Again, to everything, everything the psalmist sees, it appears that God has abandoned the Israelites, that He has turned against His his people. He has broken his contract. You have again, and here in this one verse, when it says, "In the days of his youth," that you've come against him. In that state, it says you've come against him in the days of his youth. Verse 45, the days of his youth hast thou shortened, is one of the reasons that we believe that this psalm was written in response to the Babylonian captivity, because Jehoiakim, who was the king of Israel at the time, was in his mid-20s when the Babylonian invasion happened, when Jerusalem was overrun. And so that's one of the reasons, other than, again, just the general setting of the psalm. But again, the writer here just says, from where I sit, it appears that you have broken your word. And unfortunately, sometimes Satan is able to manipulate our circumstances in such a way, and our faith is weak, where we, like the psalmist, question whether God cares, whether He's going to honor His word or not. And so, one of the things I think about, and I'm not a pilot, but I know some people who are, and I've talked to them, is that, one of the things they're taught, is, don't be deceived by what you trust your instruments. If your instruments tells you you're flying upside down, trust them. And that's kind of the lesson we're learning from this psalm is sometimes what we see, it appears that God isn't keeping His contract, keeping His end of the deal. That it appears that He's forgot about that peace that passes all understanding and that abundant life. And so, but the psalmist, again, was what he wasn't, what he really, again, our perspective is limited. He didn't understand that actually by allowing this, this attack, this destruction of Jerusalem, God was actually honoring His covenant, because He, in the covenant that He had made with Israel, again, they had rejected God. They had disobeyed Him. And so, just as the covenant that God made, He was disciplining His people. And so, again, when we experience discipline from God, it's not that God is breaking His promises. Um, we're not looking at all His promises. Again, He whom He loves, He chastises. And so we have to learn that, again, yes, there are promises in the Word of God to bless us, to protect us, to provide for us. But there are also promises that when we are disobedient, He will discipline, just as an earthly parent. They're not breaking the rules, I guess you'd say, when they discipline a child. They're doing what a parent does. When you bring a child into this world, and there's not a signed document we sign anywhere, but there's an understanding when you bring a child. Well, there should be anyway. For some people, it doesn't, but generally speaking, when you bring a child into this world, there is the understanding that you are going to provide for that child. You're going to care for that child, clothe that child, feed that child, protect that child, educate that child. All those things that come with being a parent. It's just understood. You're more or less, again, you may not be putting your signature, but there's a contract basically that I'm going to do what's right by this child. Now, you and I both know that also part of that arrangement, again, that many parents don't want to honor, is that not only am I going to educate and provide and protect and care for that child, but if that child's disobedient, uh, I'm also saying, hey, I'm going to raise that child. I'll discipline that child. I'm going to train. What's about train up a child? And so that contract with that child has two sides. If all you do is live by the side that says, I'm going to bless them, I'm going to give them this, give them that, you're going to raise a monster. We know that there has to be that discipline side as well. And in the covenant God made with David, it was the same way. There was the promise to bless. There was the promise to maintain the throne. but there was also the understanding that the people of Israel would be chastised if they violated this commandment. And so, you and I today, we have to, again, as we're looking at our circumstances, as we're looking at our situation, we need to be honest and not just look at the promise side of it, but ask ourselves, am I being disciplined? Am I being chastised? Am I in this circumstance because God is trying to correct me and remove something from my life or stir me to do something rather than just blame Him and question His love and His promises. All right, I hope that helps you, and hope that helps you see things a little clearer as you go through this life, go through this journey. All right, have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning.